Prince William puts his money where his mouth is, and I hope he's off to Turkey.
And Meghan Markle's tragedy tour continues. Whose grief is she monetizing today? Gives powerful speech. And it's like I could give like 5 or 6 examples, and if I'd spent more time on it, I probably could have found more. But you can see it was the copy and paste of Harry and Meghan's team, that the journalists just copied and pasted, threw it on the headline, because that is not normal for every outlet to have this basically the same headline, Meghan Markle's powerful speech. What that is that's lazy journalism, that's weekend journalism.
Page 6, Hello, Magazine, and In Style all ran the exact same headline, Meghan Markle delivers powerful speech. And it wasn't just them. A whole wave of outlets across the media used that same word powerful like it was copy-pasted from the same document. Because it probably was. This is not how real journalism works. When competing outlets all land on the identical phrasing within hours of each other, that's not coincidence, that's a press release doing the heavy lifting. The Sussex communications team wrote the framing, sent it out, and the outlets running on weekend skeleton crews and desperate to push content fast just ran it as is. No independent editorial judgment, no original angle, just copy, paste, publish. What you're left with is a wall of identical headlines that looks like massive press interest, but it's manufactured. Real news generates varied coverage because different journalists find different angles. A press release generates uniform coverage because everyone's reading from the same script. The Geneva engagement produced uniform coverage.
Great headlines surrounding, her purpose in Italy, her delivery in Italy, her posture, her confidence, and basically her resilience post-cancer. She seemed to be at ease, and just the way that these children were so affectionate towards her is such a positive reflection on your ambassador.
Years education for children, the way to bring up children. But I think the overriding impression for me, and I think took her by surprise, was the number of people who turned out to try and catch a glimpse of her. It was obviously a big deal. Look, it's her first international trip since the cancer, so there was a degree of interest. But even by her, standards, I think she might have been pleasantly touched and surprised by the way the people of the region embraced her visit.
That uniformity is the receipts. Now contrast that with Princess Catherine's trip to Reggio Emilia, Italy the week before. Different outlets covered completely different angles. Her early years research, her return to international duties after her health battle, her genuine connection with Italian children, the real policy work behind her Shaping Us campaign. No two headlines said the same thing because no press release told them what to say. Royal commentator Rupert Bell pointed out that the most striking part of Catherine's Italy trip wasn't even the policy work, it was the crowds. People came out in numbers that reportedly even caught Catherine off guard. The Italian region embraced her at a level that went beyond what anyone expected, and the children at the early years facility lit up around her in a way that felt completely real and unscripted. This was also her first international engagement since her cancer treatment, and that added an emotional layer that audiences worldwide had been waiting for. Underneath all the public warmth, she was doing serious research into the Reggio Emilia early learning model, one of the most respected early childhood development frameworks in the world. Looking ahead, the household is reportedly preparing a potential India engagement later this year, built around William's Earthshot Prize ceremony. India's relationship with the Crown is complex. It's a Commonwealth nation with strong post-imperial sovereignty, and that kind of diplomatic navigation is exactly where Catherine's institutional instincts shine. Separately, a recorded interview of King Charles surfaced this week.
He looked completely relaxed and happy, and I think that transmitted itself to the children, who seemed to revel in suddenly having this sort of real-life princess in town. So there was a sort of glitz and glamour about it, but hopefully above the glitz and glamour of it and the sort of PR side of it, that what she was able to do is continue her research.
In which he revealed he named a wood after his grandson, Prince George Wood. It's a small gesture, but it says something big about how the environmental values of this family are being passed down across generations. What King Charles built around environmental stewardship over decades as Prince of Wales didn't stop with him. William picked it up, folding nature and housing priorities into his Duchy initiative. And George, he's already being woven into that same legacy, a wood literally named after him. 3 generations, 1 continuous mission. That's not accidental, that's institutional architecture being built in real time. Now back to Italy, because what Catherine studied in Reggio Emilia runs deeper than a photo op. The model is built around extended family, especially the grandmother figure, stepping in as the childcare backbone while parents work. It's a community raising children together, making sure kids get real, sustained adult attention during the years that matter most. Catherine isn't trying to copy-paste that model onto every culture. The research is about pulling out what actually works and giving parents practical tools, not a rule book. Different cultures have cracked different pieces of the puzzle, and the goal is to gather those pieces. There's also a generational debate quietly running underneath all of this.
These are all the things, as I say, it's a minority. It is something that is, people save a lot of money and think the system is better. Now you can have day schools. You don't have these schools. You can go for a day option. But then obviously in that case, you'd have to be, looking at all sorts of ways forward.
Older frameworks were built on structure, set bedtimes, independence, discipline, no immediate response to every cry. Today's research pushes back on some of that. And then screens enter the picture, a challenge no previous generation had to face. And suddenly the question of firm limits on digital access becomes central to the whole parenting conversation. Catherine's research places that responsibility squarely on parents' boundaries, structure, engagement, and one very real example of that debate is playing out inside the Cambridge household right now: what to do about George's secondary schooling. The boarding school question is live. Catherine went to Marlborough College as a boarder. William and Harry both went to Eton. George is approaching the age where that institutional path traditionally kicks in. But reportedly, Catherine and William are genuinely weighing whether keeping George closer to home might serve him better. Boarding schools today aren't what they were a generation ago, far more pastoral support, far less cold institutional distance, but the decision still signals something bigger about how the next generation of senior royals plans to raise their children. Underneath all the speculation sits something far more serious. Catherine is building a long-term early years research program targeting the preschool window before
parents do anything. It's all part of a big picture, and I think that's what the Earthshot, if I understand it, not the Earthshot, but her early years stuff, is about making sure that there is a joined up thinking, something to help parents to provide the best tools to help infants and move things forward.
Formal education even begins when a child's emotional and cognitive foundations are being laid. The research pulls from Denmark, Italy, and beyond, tracking children from infancy through to around age 7 or 8. That timeline is intentional. You can't rush developmental research. The credibility comes from the years of data, not a viral post. And that's exactly what separates this from the avalanche of parenting advice flooding social media every single day, where everyone's an expert and almost nobody has the evidence to back it up. Catherine brings an institutional platform, years of expensive, structured research, and real statistical foundations. That's not content, that's work. There's an old saying that captures the core of Catherine's entire mission: you can see the man in the child at 7. The environment a child grows up in during those earliest years shapes everything that comes after. That's not a theory, that's the foundation Catherine is building her work on, and it carries real weight. The research also operates with an honest acknowledgement that family life isn't always what it looks like from the outside. What appears fine on the surface can be hiding serious difficulty behind closed doors. Giving parents real, practical tools for those early years isn't a luxury, it's a genuine societal investment.
World we live in where it's like screens.
Yeah. Well, and no. Discipline. I believe, because if you've got your children still up at 11 o'clock, when's daddy and mummy time, or whatever, just to, go to bed, 7 o'clock, routine. But call me old fashioned. And what do I know?
And the reach of Catherine's influence is showing up in unexpected places. Sports journalists, commentary figures, people who would never normally sit down and debate parenting approaches are now having those conversations because her platform elevated the subject to a level they couldn't ignore. That's how institutional influence actually works. One person watching catches a single insight, applies it at home, and the downstream effect quietly ripples outward. The contrast with how the Sussex household deploys its platform couldn't be more different. Catherine uses hers to drive substantive public conversation. The Sussex household uses its platform to manufacture the appearance of engagement while chasing commercial relevance. Two platforms, structurally opposite purposes, and the contrast of the week goes even further. William disclosed he is paying £300,000 annually in rent on Forest Lodge, roughly £100,000 more than the previous tenant. At a time when peppercorn rent arrangements for royals have drawn serious public criticism, William is paying commercial rate and making the number public. That's a direct signal that the next generation intends to operate differently. The scale of William's Duchy of Cornwall initiative backs that signal up with real substance. According to The Times, he plans to sell roughly 1/5 of the duchy, funneling the profits into housing and environmental projects. Over the next decade, £500 million is being directed toward addressing the housing and nature crisis.
Perfect example that Catherine has us having these odd conversations that normally we wouldn't be having. You would not normally be having this conversation as a sports journalist. I would not normally be having this conversation as a dog mom. But we're having it because Catherine, the Princess of Wales, her influence is so incredibly important. And that's exactly what she's doing this for.
Targeting urban and brownfield locations, converting unused buildings into sustainable homes. The goal is between 10,000 and 12,000 homes unlocked by 2040. William pays substantial income tax on duchy profits, ranking among the country's top taxpayers. He is actively restructuring an institution that could have just coasted, turning a passive income stream into a vehicle for genuine public impact. The 14-year timeline of this housing plan even extends past the point where William is likely to become king, meaning Prince George would inherit not just the duchy, but the entire long-term project his father built. Multi-generational planning in action. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, Meghan's Geneva engagement centered on a World Health Organization conference on online harms to children. The backdrop was the Lost Screen Memorial's installation, 50 illuminated light boxes styled to look like smartphones, each showing the lock screen photo of a child whose life was destroyed by cyberbullying, exploitation, or exposure to harmful content online. The families behind those memorials experienced real, devastating loss. That grief is genuine. But the Sussex household's decision to use that installation as the emotional backdrop for Meghan's policy positioning raises a serious question. At what point does centering yourself in someone else's grief stop being advocacy and start being something else entirely? The grief behind those memorials is real. The problem is the household's relationship to it.
They say that look at the child at 7, look at the man, because there is a phrase, something on those lines. I'm sure someone out there will know what the quote is, because your life is shaped by what's around you, and sometimes it's sad things. You hear about the sort of certain elements.
This isn't the first time the Sussex operation has built its public positioning on the pain of others, but this time it extended all the way to parents who lost their children. And that's a line that's hard to come back from. The hypocrisy at the center of the Geneva engagement is staggering. Hours before standing next to the world's most senior public health official to talk about the measurable, preventable dangers of exposing children to social media, Meghan posted a mirror selfie to Instagram featuring 4-year-old Lilibet. Let that sink in. And it gets sharper. Harry had gone on the Hassan Minhaj podcast in October 2025 and described the people behind these platforms as rarely evil, wicked people who want to farm children's mindsets for commercial purposes. One parent calls platform owners evil. The other parent puts their child on the platform those same owners run. The household cannot deliver a coherent message on children's online safety when its own behavior directly contradicts that message every single time. The structural irony around Archie and Lilibet runs even deeper. The original Megxit promise was that these children would be shielded from public life, protected, private, allowed to just be kids. What's actually happened is the opposite. They've become the household's most valuable audience attention asset, deployed on Instagram and across the broader PR machine whenever engagement numbers need a boost. That's not protection. That's the opposite of it. The Andre Agassi memoir laid out the long-term psychological cost of children being monetized by parents before they're old enough to consent. The Michael Jackson story documented the same pattern across a different context. The Sussex children are now operating inside that same configuration, and the documentary record on where that leads is not encouraging. Now the astrologer story. Reporting from several months ago revealed that Meghan consulted an astrologer who told her that 2026 would be her year.
What's best? What's not best? What's the best way? What do you do with a child who's naughty? How do you discipline a child? People have different views, different theories, different sort of thoughts, and I have no idea.
No, also not to mention everybody's an expert on TikTok. So here you have somebody that has this established platform and that has very expensive and years-long research and statistics behind what they're sharing.
And suddenly, everything about the household's recent operational pace makes sense. Content drops, international engagements, commercial launches, PR deployments, all hitting at a frequency that has genuinely saturated the news cycle. The household is running like a deadline is coming. The intensity isn't driven by market analysis or a coherent commercial strategy. It appears driven by the belief that this specific year carries special significance because someone reading a chart said so. And the structural problem with that approach is brutal saturation doesn't build an audience. It exhausts one. The relentless pace isn't building momentum, it's burning people out. When you're everywhere all the time, the audience doesn't lean in. They start tuning out. And that's exactly the opposite of what the Sussex household needs right now. The Australia and Geneva engagements together tell the same story. The Sydney Opera House appearance landed like a damp squib. The crowd response simply didn't show up at the level the household's framing promised. Geneva produced rows of empty seats and zero organic crowd energy. Both engagements were packaged to project serious international standing. Both delivered the operational opposite, and the cameras caught every bit of it. Here's what makes the empty seats so significant. When a public figure commands genuine cultural standing, crowds don't need to be curated. They simply show up. The organic pull of authentic public interest doesn't require logistical management or strategic framing. People come because they want to be there. What the Geneva and Australia engagements documented wasn't just a bad week. It was the measurable gap between constructed celebrity and earned public standing. That gap doesn't close through more appearances. It closes through substantive work that generates real results over real time. And the household's operational calendar isn't structured around that kind of patient, unglamorous work. The behind-the-scenes reality of both engagements deserves closer examination. The Sydney Opera House event was framed in advance as a significant cultural moment, the Sussex household returning to a Commonwealth nation with the kind of reception that would signal genuine international relevance. The photographic supply was managed, the framing was distributed, the press release machinery ran at full capacity. And then the event happened, and the crowd reality didn't match the constructed anticipation. That asymmetry between the pre-event framing and the on-the-ground reality is the documentary fingerprint of a household that has learned to manufacture the announcement better than it can manufacture the actual moment. Geneva followed the same pattern at an even more sensitive level. The World Health Organization platform carries genuine institutional weight. The subject matter online harms to children carries genuine public urgency. The installation backdrop carried genuine human grief.
The Prince of Wales will funnel profits made from selling part of the Duchy of Cornwall into projects that have the biggest, as far as he's done so far, social and environmental impact. This is coming from the Times. They say, their source says, in the next 10 years, he plans to invest £500 million in tackling the housing and nature crisis.
And the household arrived with its communications machinery fully operational, ready to convert all of that genuine weight into commercial relevance for an operation that the surrounding context was already systematically undermining. Empty seats at a WHO conference on child safety with Meghan as the featured speaker is not a minor logistical footnote. It is a signal that even within institutional settings specifically designed to generate attendance, the household's drawing power is not delivering. The gap between what the household says and what it actually does has become the defining feature of its public record. At home, where the household controls the photos and the commercial rollout, one image gets projected. Out in the world, where the crowd either shows up or it doesn't, a very different reality keeps emerging. That gap is now so thoroughly documented that the audience has largely stopped needing it, explained. The pattern speaks for itself loudly. What makes the credibility deficit so structurally damaging is that it now operates across every register the household deploys. The children's welfare messaging is undermined by the household's own deployment of its children as commercial instruments. The online safety advocacy is undermined by the Instagram behavior that directly contradicts it. The philanthropic positioning is undermined by the grief monetization pattern the cumulative record has documented. The international standing narrative is undermined by the empty seats and absent crowds the engagements keep producing. There is no dimension of the household's public positioning that the household's own behavior has left intact. Compare all of that to something genuinely substantive happening this same week, the Lady Garden charity at the Chelsea Flower Show. This organisation raises funds for ovarian cancer research, a disease that often operates silently, going undetected until it has reached a devastating stage, and that urgently needs sustained research funding to improve early detection and expand treatment options for the women it affects.
The fact is he's very aware of trying to make sure that what he does isn't just seen as money making, but it actually has a social that people can benefit. And the kind of housing that he builds leaves a legacy that is not just for the great and the good, but actually for people.
The Chelsea Garden, created on the charity's behalf, generated real publicity through real work, not through a press release distributed to weekend-staffed outlets, but through the substantive merit of what the charity actually does. The royal family attended the flower show in strong numbers, and Catherine herself is reportedly drawing design inspiration for the Forest Lodge garden from what she encountered there. That detail carries more institutional meaning than it might initially appear to. Catherine engaging with a genuine charitable initiative, finding personal creative value in what the charity has produced, and folding that engagement into her own domestic plans, that is the operational texture of authentic institutional participation. It is entirely different in character from arriving at an event as the featured speaker and leaving behind empty seats and a credibility question. The Lady Garden charity story also connects directly to Catherine's broader institutional portfolio in a way that reveals the coherence of her long-term approach. The early years research program, the mental health initiatives developed with William during their earlier institutional phase, and the cancer research adjacency that her own health journey has made personally meaningful. These are not disconnected projects assembled for commercial optics. They form a substantive institutional framework built across years of consistent, patient work. The Chelsea Flower Show appearance sits naturally within that framework because the framework is real. There is no press release required to explain why Catherine was there, because the reason is self-evident to anyone who has followed the institutional work. That is what genuine philanthropic engagement looks like. Not manufactured, not monetized, not deployed as the emotional infrastructure for a commercial positioning operation. Just substantive work generating authentic attention from an audience that has learned to recognize the difference. The contrast with the Sussex household's grief-adjacent Geneva positioning isn't subtle, it is structural, categorical, and increasingly visible to the broader public audience that both households are competing for. One operation raises funds for research into a disease that takes the lives of women who never saw it coming. The other raises its own commercial profile through the grief of families who lost children to online harms and then posts a child to Instagram hours before discussing those exact harms on a global stage. These are not comparable operations occupying different points on the same spectrum. They are structurally opposite approaches to the question of what institutional platforms are for. The financial dimension of the Sussex household's trajectory.
Yeah, and his rental bill.
Yeah.
On his house, we heard, he doesn't pay peppercorn rent, which is, so that issue's been laid to rest. Because
he's just he's aware of what it could look like. And he's cautious. And I think that's good.
And the optics
adds a layer of urgency to the operational picture that the saturation strategy does nothing to address. The current burn rate against the household's available runway produces a timeline of approximately 5 years before the commercial mathematics become unsustainable. That 5-year figure is not a comfortable cushion, it is a countdown that the household's current operational approach is actively compressing rather than extending. Here is why the saturation strategy makes the financial problem worse rather than better. Commercial relevance in the contemporary media landscape is not built through volume, it is built through selectivity. The figures who command sustained commercial attention in the entertainment and lifestyle space are not the figures who appear everywhere simultaneously. They are the figures who create anticipation through strategic absence, who make each appearance feel like an event, rather than another entry in an exhausting content calendar. The Sussex household's operational approach produces the opposite of anticipation. It produces the scrolling past response, the audience recognition that another piece of Sussex content has appeared, accompanied by the decision not to engage because the previous 15 pieces didn't deliver enough value to justify the investment of attention. The Netflix partnership provides the clearest commercial case study. The platform paid a reported sum that represented a significant institutional bet on the household's ability to generate audience engagement at scale. The content that has emerged from that partnership has not produced the viewership numbers that would justify a renewal at comparable terms. The With Love, Meghan lifestyle series landed without the cultural impact that a genuine audience relationship would have generated. The docuseries that preceded it generated controversy without generating the sustained engagement that controversy can sometimes produce when the underlying audience connection is real. The household is burning through a commercial partnership without building the audience foundation that would make the next commercial partnership possible at the same level. The As Ever brand launch follows the same pattern. Positioned as a lifestyle product line with the Sussex household's California aesthetic as its commercial identity, the brand launched into a market that requires genuine consumer loyalty to sustain. Lifestyle brands do not succeed through press releases and Instagram posts. They succeed through the kind of authentic audience relationship that develops when the public figure behind the brand has built real trust with a real
personal opinion. You use other people's grief and vulnerable people to try to change public perception of them. They're so boring and I can't take them seriously, but there's an annoyance inside me that Deadline will write this article. Netflix will say, yeah, we're working with them on this project. Are they not reading the freaking room that we're done with this
community over real time? The household's credibility deficit, documented across every dimension of its public positioning, is precisely the condition that makes authentic audience relationship impossible to build. Consumers who don't trust the messenger don't buy the product, regardless of how many identical headlines describe the launch as powerful. The astrological framework that reportedly shapes the household's 2026 operational calendar adds a dimension that would be almost comic if the financial stakes weren't real. The belief that a particular year carries special commercial significance because an astrologer identified it as such is not a business strategy, it is a substitution for one. Real commercial strategy involves market analysis, audience research, product development timelines, and the patient construction of the consumer relationships that make sustained revenue possible. The Sussex household's 2026 intensity appears calibrated to a deadline that exists in an astrological reading rather than in any commercial reality. When the year ends without the breakthrough the astrologer promised, the household will not have built the structural foundation that would make the following year more promising. It will simply have exhausted its audience further. Where the week leaves the broader institutional picture is clarifying rather than surprising. The Cambridge configuration continues to convert genuine policy work, substantive research, and real institutional engagement into the kind of public trust that compounds over time. William's Duchy initiative is restructuring £500 million worth of institutional resources toward housing and environmental impact that will outlast his tenure as Prince of Wales and extend into George's eventual inheritance of the project. Catherine's early years research program is building the evidence base that will eventually produce practical guidance for parents and schools across different cultural contexts. The Chelsea Flower Show engagement connects to a genuine charitable mission addressing a disease that affects real women in ways that carry real consequences. These are not press release events. They do not require identical headlines distributed to weekend-staffed outlets to generate the appearance of substantive coverage. They generate varied, organic coverage because each dimension of the work produces a different, genuine angle that different outlets find independently worth exploring. The variation in the coverage is the documentary signature of substantive work. The uniformity of the Sussex coverage is the documentary signature of its opposite. The audience that has followed both households across the recent period has now developed a level of analytical sophistication that fundamentally changes the operational landscape for the Sussex household. Early in the Megxit trajectory, the household's narrative enjoyed the benefit of novelty. The story of a senior royal couple departing the institution, relocating to California, and building an independent commercial operation was genuinely new, and new stories generate genuine audience curiosity, regardless of their underlying substance. That novelty premium has been fully exhausted. The audience now approaches Sussex content with a framework of prior knowledge that makes the construction visible in real time. When an identical headline appears across multiple outlets within the same news cycle, the audience recognizes the press release machinery. When an engagement produces empty seats, the audience registers the gap between the framing and the reality. When a child appears on Instagram hours before a speech about children's online safety, the audience identifies the contradiction without requiring it to be explained. The household's communications operation was built for an audience that didn't yet have the pattern recognition to see through it. That audience no longer exists in the numbers required to sustain the operation. The verdict that the cumulative documentary record continues to consolidate is not a harsh judgment delivered by critics or competitors. It is a mathematical outcome produced by the operational choices the household has made across 5 years of documented behavior. The household chose saturation over selectivity. It chose constructed coverage over substantive work. It chose the appearance of philanthropic engagement over the patient, unglamorous reality of it. It chose to deploy its children as commercial instruments rather than protect them as private individuals. Each of those choices produced a short-term operational benefit and a long-term structural cost. And the long-term structural costs are now accumulating faster than the short-term benefits can offset them. The household will continue to manufacture coverage. The astrological deadline will continue to drive operational intensity. The press release machinery will continue to distribute identical headlines to friendly outlets. The Instagram content will continue to appear at the pace the saturation strategy requires. And the audience will continue to watch with the pattern recognition it has now fully developed and read every layer of the construction with a clarity that the household's communications operation cannot outmaneuver, no matter how many engagements it schedules or how many powerful speeches it announces. The gap between what the household says and what it does will keep widening. The financial runway will keep compressing. The empty seats will keep appearing in the venues where organic crowds would gather if the underlying audience relationship were real. And the Cambridge configuration will keep doing the substantive, patient, unglamorous work that generates the genuine public trust that no press release can manufacture and no astrological prediction can deliver. That is where the week leaves things, and it is exactly where the evidence has been pointing for some time now. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, hit that like button and share it with someone who would find it just as eye-opening. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. See you on the next one.